A date which will live in infamy.
Both
of those projects, initiatives, got off the ground because of the Guerrero.
For the 11 Olympic team members slain in West Germany, the Olympic Games...
Zugerecht waren Brüder in Amerika. So tausend Schabbat at the Skizzar.
Out of the 24 who were killed were Americans who had come to learn in Hebron.
I say 1 million Jewish children who were made to be cut loose.
Whoever heard such beautiful words?
It is never too little. It is never too late. And it is never enough.
Jewish History Soundbites, bringing alive the world of our glorious past. Here is our host, live from Jerusalem, Jewish historian and tour guide
Yehuda Geber with Jewish History Soundbites, and this episode about the Vurke Chassidic Dynasty has been dedicated to the memory of Dora Rosen Wiener by her family. And Vurke is simply a small town, a suburb of Warsaw. Vurke was a very prominent Chassidic dynasty with great tzaddikim at its helm, great leaders in the 19th and 20th centuries, and it's less well known today. Again, one of those communities of central Poland that got completely decimated, and it is still with us through Amshinov, and primarily Amshinov, also Strikov, other smaller ones as well. Aleksander comes from them too, and others, and I feel like it has an important place in Jewish history, in Polish Jewish history of the 19th century, early 20th, and therefore I want to give a little bit of an overview of Vurke and talk about the offshoots and branches of it, and see Vurke in the context of Pshischa, where it comes from and what made it unique, and the different personalities who were its leaders, especially the founder of the dynasty, Rav Yitzchak Kalish of Vurke, and its legacy today. I want to open up with a story from one of my trips several years ago. It was a family trip. Grandparents were taking their children and grandchildren on a family roots trip, and the family came from a prominent Amshinov family, and so it was very much revolving around Vurke and Amshinov and Warsaw, that whole area, and one of his grandchildren asked him, and the grandfather was an incredibly wise man. I gained a lot from him on that trip, actually, which is always exciting. To be able to meet an older person and spend a week with them and gain from their wisdom and experience and knowledge and family background and all that. So I listened to one of his grandchildren asking him a question, and he said, Pshischa has this reputation as having given birth to Kotsk. Pshischa's, most Polish Hasidic dynasties came from Pshischa at some point or another. And when I say Polish, I mean Central Poland or Congress Poland, Greater Poland. There's so many different terms from it, but it means not Galicia, and definitely not Ukraine or Hungary or Rice and White Russia, Belarus, that area as well. We're talking about the Central Poland, the heart of Chassidus in the 19th, 20th century, and Galicia was too. That's the truth. But talking about Central Poland. Either way, so Pshischa was the dominant one that many of the famous and not so famous dynasties came from it, and many associate Kotsk and later Ger with Pshischa. And his grandson's question to his grandfather was, how could it be that Vurke, which was just as large and maybe even larger, together with its offshoots, Aleksander and Amshinov and others, also came from Pshischa, and yet we associate Kotsk with its sharpness and its extremity and its intensity is probably the best word. That we associate with Pshischa, whereas Vurke, which is all about warmth and love and Avas Yisrael and love of the Jewish people, that comes from Pshischa as well. How could it be that both of them came from the same Beis Medrash, came from the same origin in Pshischa, and they're so different? And the grandfather's answer, which is an answer that's applicable to many things in life and in Jewish history, and he says the basic approach of both of them in their avodah and their chassidus comes from Pshischa, but ultimately, what defines the dynasty and the teachings and the experience is one's own personality and individual approach, the individual avodah, which becomes the dominant force and feature in one's teachings and legacy and what they leave over to their own descendants and students. And Rav Yitzchak of Vurke, Rav Yitzchak Kalish of Vurke, was of a very different temperament than Rav Menachem Mendel Morgenstern of Kutsk. There were two of them were very close friends from their Pshischa days, but they had very different temperaments. They had very different styles and personalities and moods, and therefore they took their Pshischa background into two very different directions, and that came to define Polish Hasidus. There was the Vurke approach, which was less elitist, more populist, more about love and warmth and strong leadership and responsibility, which we'll get to. Whereas Kutsk was this extremely intensity and very, very extreme in a way, and we spoke about Kutsk in other times. So here it comes from Vurke, and I thought that was a very wise answer. So that's a good way to open it, to open up the story of Vurke, and of course it's even if this episode has been long in coming, it doesn't matter if we're late when it comes to this episode, because Vurke and Amshinov, we can be late. And if you didn't get this joke, then you might as well turn off your thing, listen to a different podcast, because this episode is not for you. So, the place of Vurke in the history of the movement, especially of its founder, Rav Yitzchak Kalish of Vurke, who holds such a prominent place in the history of Chassidus in the 19th century, as well as in general Polish Jewish history of the 19th century, because he becomes a leader of Polish Jewry, not only of Vurke, not only of Chassidus, and not only of his Chassidic community, but he emerges as this great leader of Polish Jews in the 19th century, first half of the 19th century. He passes away in 1848. So I'm going to devote a lot of time to him because he kind of almost dominates the narrative and he overshadows everything else there is about Vurke. So I'll attempt to navigate around that because I do want to focus on him, but I want to also give a richer background to Vurke itself and also note some of the other prominent personalities among his own descendants and students. So if we're going into the world of Polish Hasidus in the 19th century, we have the Chassidic dynasties of Central Poland in the 19th century, first half, and the second half of the 19th century. Primarily, almost all of them basically come from the Rebbe of Meilich, the Naim Elimelech, and primarily through his student, the Chayze of Lublin, and also the Koznitzer Magid, but that's where Polish Hasidus comes from, Galicia Hasidus comes from, and even beyond. You also have all the way into Hungary. Yismach Meish is a student of the Chayze also. That's for another time. So if we would just summarize, just to see where Vurke fits into this great picture, we're looking at Central Poland, Congress Poland of the 19th century. The first thing you have is the non-Pshischa dynasties, which are there, right? We said most of them come from Pshischa, but then we also have to note the ones that do not come from Pshischa. So the non-Pshischa dynasties of Congress Poland in the 19th century, you have Koznitz, origins in the Koznitzer Magid himself, and later on his descendants also Maglanitsa and Grodzisk, Piaseczna, kind of comes from that also. You have Kuzmir, which Mazhitz is the most famous descendant from Kuzmir. In recent years, Yablona became more famous also, so that was another branch of Kuzmir. You have Zvolin, other branches of Kuzmir. You have, of course, another dynasty is Lelov, Radoshitz, a very prominent one, Radomsk, I spoke about quite some time ago, and a few others. These lists are far from comprehensive, obviously, so, of course there's going to be emails, hey, you didn't mention this, you didn't mention that. All right, don't worry about it, I'm just giving an idea, a basic overview. Then you have the Pshischa dynasties of Central Poland. There's Pshischa itself, which eventually one of its descendants of Pshischa is also Biala, and a few others. And then there's the two primary branches of and offshoots of Pshischa. The generally more famous one, like I said before, is Kotsk. And there you have Reb Chanech Levin of Alexander, I mentioned, one's Reb Chil Meir Gustinin, Reb Wolf Land of Strikov. And then Ger comes from Kotsk, and there's the split off from Kotsk of Ishbitz, which becomes Radzin later on. And I spoke about that once also, and it also includes the descendants of Kotsk, Sachachev, Pilov, Lukov, Sokolov, and a few others. Okay, so that's one main branch of Pshischa with all their offshoots as well. Now, in 1827, when Rav Simcha Bunim of Pshischa passed away, it seems that it was only a minority of his followers who went to Tomashov, to Rav Menachem Mendel Morgenstern, who eventually would be called the Kotzker. It seems that a majority of the, again, it's hard to know the numbers, but let's say a significant number went with the Kotzker, and another significant number, I don't want to say majority, minority, I don't get yelled at, but there was a significant number that stayed in Pshischa. Rav Yitzchak of Vurke, Rav Yaakov Aryeh of Radzamin, Rav Yaakov Aryeh Guterman of Radzamin, Rav Shrag of Feivel Danziger of Gritza were three leading students of Rav Simcha Bunim of Pshischa, and they go to his son, Rav Simcha Bunim's son, in Pshischa. They followed him, Rav Avram Moshe Banhard, the son of, he was 27 years old, he's in Pshischa, he's buried next to his father. When we're in Pshischa on trips, we see Rav Avram Moshe as well. And they stay there. Now, 2 years later, unfortunately, this Rav Avram Moshe passes away at a young age, 1829, and now Rav Yitzchak Kalish, later on, of Vurke, emerges as the leader of this faction of Pshischa. It's interesting that Rav Yitzchak of Vurke begins his tenure as the leader of this faction at around the same time that the Kotzker moved from Tomashov to Kotsk, which is where he reached his glory in Kotsk. So these two were very close friends, and they continued to be very close friends throughout their lives. And there's quite a few stories between the two. Some of them are very exciting. They had great respect for one another and love for the two of them. Really beautiful friendship that the Kotzker and Rav Yitzchak of Vurke had. And the two of them really emerge as leaders at almost the same time. The Vurke faction, either from students and associates or descendants, all of Rav Yitzchak of Vurke, includes many dynasties of Central Poland, some of which were quite large before the war, but were either almost entirely or even entirely decimated in the Holocaust. And that, of course, includes Vurke itself, but like I said, also Amshinov, Aleksander, Strikov, Radzimin, not Radzin. Radzin, we said, is from Ishbitz. Before that, Kotsk. This is Radzimin. These are all just simply towns in Poland, usually in the Warsaw or Lodz area. Nederzin, Skiernovich, and a bunch of other smaller ones. There's also several branches, each of Vurke and Amshinov themselves. So you're talking about they each branch off. Many of these are not well known today. And many of them are not known at all. And yet they dominated the Polish Jewish landscape for a full century, from the second half of the 19th century when Rav Yitzchak of Vurke passed away in 1848, until the Holocaust. And it's important to note that these were not Ukrainian, Hungarian, or Romanian dynasties and communities. They were in central Poland. So they're in the middle of it all, right? They play an outsized role in Jewish life, in commerce, in politics, in rabbinical leadership in many towns. They're very prominent. Just as one small example, Skiernovich, which, anytime I've mentioned it to groups or people, they like raise their eyebrows. Very few people have even heard of it. Completely unknown today. But a Skiernovich chassid by the name of Rav Yitzchak Gerstenkorn was the founder of Bnei Brak. he led a group of Skarnovich and other Polish chassidim from the Warsaw area to Palestine in the 1920s, and they were the ones who built Bnei Brak. So it was Polish chassidim, Skarnovich and others from Vurke who built Bnei Brak. So they have left a nice imprint there. And there's also something to note about many of these Vurke descendant Rebbes, who not just descendants, but also from students and associates and everything from Rav Yitzchak of Vurke. So many of them were rabbis of their towns. They were rabbis of the towns, and later on they would emerge as a Chassidic Rebbe as well, because Chassidim were attracted to them. They gained this following very often by a grassroots fashion. They didn't establish themselves as a Rebbe. They were a Talmid Chacham, a rabbi, a paisik of a town in Poland, a small town in the Warsaw area, many of them. And eventually enough Chassidim came to them to seek out guidance and counsel and advice and teachings that they emerged as a Rebbe as well. So that's a very interesting thing to note. And the next idea to note is that there's an endless number of towns in Poland. Jews lived in thousands of market towns. Thousands. They lived in big urban environments also, as the 19th century wore on, and especially after World War I. But they also lived in thousands of towns. And therefore, when you opened the new branch of the dynasty, you simply were in another town, and eventually the name of that town became attached to your legacy. So now we're very limited. Now we're kind of like, now when there's splits, you have to come up with the, street numbers and stuff like that to distinguish between two branches of the Hasidic groupings. But because pretty much everyone lives in either Yerushalayim, Bnei Brak, Brooklyn, or a couple of other places. The Chassidic Rebbes I'm talking about. I don't know if they made it to Lakewood yet, or Tom's River, whatever it is. But then in Poland, you went to just another town and you established yourself there, and eventually your dynasty came to be called by the next town. So even if you had 5 sons or sons-in-law who became Rebbes over the next couple of decades after one Rebbe's passing, so all 5 of them were in different towns, different areas, no competition, and they each came to have different names of whatever town they were in. Of course, they could have competition too, and there was no shortage of those also, but that's a different story. Either way, so when we get to the founder himself, Rav Yitzchak of Vurke, and he's really what he's comes to be most known for is that he's the beginning of Jewish politics in Poland, which is an incredible feat and accomplishment. When he passed away, there was even a question, should they bury him in Warsaw, because he spent so much time in Warsaw interceding with government officials and lobbying and organizing things, and I'm going to talk about exactly what he did. So maybe they should bury him in Warsaw, because his legacy is his leadership in the Jewish people and how he organized their relationship with the government and his shtadlanis, his intercession and lobbying and politics that he organized on behalf of the Jewish community of Poland. So that is represented by Warsaw. Or should he be buried in Vurke, which is represented by the fact that he was a Chassidic Rebbe, a big tzaddik, who had a following of Chassidim, where he would teach them. So what's the dominant element or facet of Rav Yitzchak of Vurke's personality? Where should he be buried? And I think it was his friend Rabbi Cheskel Taub of Kuzmir. I think perhaps it was someone else. I have to check if the dates match up. If Rabbi Cheskel Kuzmir was still alive, I should have checked that up beforehand. But if not, it was another one of his acquaintances. That was they asked advice where Rav Yitzchak of Vurke should be buried. And the advice given was that he should be buried in Vurke, because at the end of the day, what he should be remembered for is that he was a great Rebbe and a great Tzaddik. And he said, don't worry, for the other part of his legacy, of what he did on behalf of the Jewish people in the political leadership sense, his son will eventually be buried in Warsaw. He made that prediction, if it was Rav Cheskel of Kuzmir or someone else. And in fact, his son, Rav Menachem Mendel Kalish, the next Vurke Rebbe, who is known as the Silent Tzadik, the Silent Rebbe, who we'll get to hopefully, he was actually buried in Warsaw. So, but either way, what brings it out is that it's representative of these two facets, these two sides to him. So his philosophy, Rav Yitzchak of Vurke's philosophy, was about love, Avas Yisrael, love of everyone, responsibility for everyone, love of the world, love of the Jewish people. Seemingly, at least in theory, a very different type of Pshischa approach than Kutsk, for instance, like I mentioned. But as we'll see, there were some other Vurke Rebbes who were much more serious, much more intense, much more pessimistic, much more, we would say, Kutsk style. And some of these descendants of Rav Yitzchak of Vurke were actually even followers of the Kutzker himself. But the primary thing that Rav Yitzchak of Kalish of Vurke is remembered for is his shtadlanus, is his Jewish politics, interceding on behalf of the Jewish people of Poland, and sometimes even beyond Poland, even in the Pale of Settlement. And this was unique in several respects. Why was it unique that he becomes this kind of like self-made political leader of the Jewish people in Poland? Because first of all, it was his own initiative. He did this on his own. No one appointed him to that position. He sought it out. He wanted to do for his people, on behalf of his people. The second of all, it was the first time in the history of the Chassidic movement that this was happening, that a Chassidic leader was making himself into a political leader, into someone who lobbies the government on behalf of the Jewish community. Although, at around the same time as this, so it's hard to know who was first, almost the same time that Silent Tzadik of Chabad, Rav Menachem Mendel, Silent Tzadik, the third leader of Chabad, he commenced on a similar approach in the Pale of Settlement, where he also emerged as this leader, as in a political sense, as far as the Russian Tsarist government as well. In other words, this is the first foray of the Chassidic movement into politics at the national level, and that a Chassidic leader is the one who's assuming the role. It's quite unique. He also, another fascinating aspect of this political leadership is that he represented the Jews of Poland as a whole. Not his specific court of Vurke, not even the Chassidic community of Poland, rather Polish Jewry, religious, Chassidic, non-Chassidic, secular, whatever it was, whoever was Polish Jews at the time as a collective. And this understandably greatly raised the prestige of the Chassidic movement in general in the eyes of both the masses of Polish Jewry and the leaders of Polish Jewry, the rabbinical establishment leaders of Polish Jewry, who were non-Chassidic. It also made it more mainstream. It's not a fringe community anymore. Look, a great Chassidic leader is actually representing the entire Polish Jewry in the halls of power in Warsaw. The fact that the Polish and Russian, the political status of Poland, of Congress Poland at the time, is quite interesting. Also because, it's officially under Tsarist Russia. This is the post-Napoleonic era. But the Russian Tsars grant Congress Poland a certain Polish autonomy to the Polish aristocracy, and over the 19th century they take away that autonomy, especially after the Polish nobility revolts against the Tsars in 1831, and then later in 1863. So Polish autonomy is taken away by the Russians, and they establish their sovereignty in Congress Poland as well. So it's in this somewhat Polish autonomy, but it's somewhat under the Tsars in Russia as well. So exactly who's in charge in Warsaw is not so clear. But in any event, the Polish or Russian authorities accepted Rav Yitzchak of Vurke's representing the Jewish people in Poland as a whole. They saw him as an official representative. He collected signatures from all the regional rabbis all over Congress Poland to give him power of attorney to represent them and the Jewish community as a whole vis-a-vis the Warsaw government, and they granted it. All these rabbis grant him power of attorney, and it's documented, it's signed, they have letters, and he comes into the Polish government, he comes into the palaces and to the government things, and they accept it. They recognize him as the official representative of the Jewish people in Poland, which is fascinating. The fact that it actually worked, that he was able to pull off this feat. And then the last thing why it makes it so unique is his professionalism. It was organized. He had teams of assistants, legal assistants, administrative team, and drafting letters and petitions and lobbyists and meetings and organization. It was very, very impressive for the early 19th century by a Hasidic leader to have such a profound understanding of politics and to use that to the best represent the needs of the entire Polish Jewish community. And I'll give a few examples of things he accomplished. There was the kashrus of meat issues. There was a bunch of challenges. There was a law that changed that allowed the leasing of the kosher meat tax to Christian butchers. So this would, almost make it impossible to supervise the kashrus. He lobbied the Ministry of Finance for kosher meat supervision and to make it a crime to have false advertising of kosher meat when it was not in fact kosher or supervised. He was able to get amendments to the tax code on kosher meat and supervising rights. And he sent the ministry letters in perfect Polish. All this exists in Polish archives till today. Meaning these are real documents. We know this all from firsthand. This is not some sort of mythology created by members of the Jewish community who are proud of what he did. This is actual real stuff. He met with government officials. He got, like I said, the power of attorney from across the board of Polish Jewry. Nothing specifically Hasidic about this. This is for the entire Polish Jewish community. The Polish government recognizes him as the official representative in its entirety. And this is the first time that the Polish government recognized some sort of central Jewish representative since the abolishment of the Vad Ha'arba Haratzos, the Council of the Four Lands Autonomous Jewish Governing Council, which was abolished in 1764. And here we're more 60, 70 years later, 1830s. And here it is, Rav Yitzchak of Vurke was able to accomplish this feat. He was granted audiences with the Viceroy of Poland and was able to circumvent the usual bureaucratic procedures. Over the next few years, he successfully appealed several other measures regarding the sale and regulation of kosher meat in Poland. He was very involved in the 1840s, the mid-1840s, of the Gzeras HaMalbushim, it was called, the clothing decree, which was not about Hasidic dress. It was about Jewish dress. That's another thing that's very misunderstood of that time. He and the Chidushei Arim, his close friend, Rabbi Meyer, then Rottenberg, later Alter, the Chidushei Arim. So the two of them worked together. The Kutzker actually disagreed with the two of them. He felt that the dress is not a major issue. Jews always change their dress. What's the big deal? We could change it again. But the Rav Yitzchak of Vurke and the Chidushei Arim and others took it very seriously, and they solicited the Rizhiner, Rabbi Yisrael Friedman of Rizhin. They solicited his assistance as well. They traveled all the way to Volyn in Ukraine, in the Pale, to get him to intercede with Russian officials as well. They even tried to get Moses Montefiore to support the cause on his visit to Russia in 1845, 1846. And he saw himself as representing all the Jews because it was part of his love everyone philosophy. If you love all the Jewish people, then you have to take responsibility for them, and you have to take a leadership role, and you have to be an activist, and you have to take initiative to help the Jewish people. He fought vigorously with government officials that there was this rabbinical school that was opened in Warsaw shouldn't undermine, which was more associated with the enlightened members of the community. He didn't want that rabbinical school to undermine the established traditional rabbinical norms. So he lobbied against that school. His activities had a decisive impact on both the Hasidic movement in Poland as a whole and on Polish Jewry in its entirety as well. In fact, it would be difficult to find anything he did which was specifically on behalf of Vurke Chassidim exclusively. All of his leadership was on a national scale. He fought for a right to put up an Eruvin for Shabbos, which was hard to get, in many cities. It was hard to do. He fought for that right. He was able to get a law repealed which required Jews to get a civil divorce before they got a religious divorce. He was involved in there was the Rav Mitam, the crown rabbis at the time, the stuff as well. He was involved in that. He was involved in releasing Jewish prisoners, Pidyon Shvuyim. He was involved in the Jewish military service, also together with Moses Montefiore, who was visiting Russia in 1846. This is the time of the Cantonist decrees of Tsar Nicholas I. though Congress Poland wasn't really part of the Pale of Settlement at this point, but still the Jewish military service was an issue. He had administrative legal aides, filing petitions, dealing with the bureaucracy, really professionally run, understanding the complexities of the law and the different relative levels of government officials in Warsaw. It was a very professional operation, and Rav Yitzchak of Vurke held this position pretty much unchallenged through all of his time in this position. It was unchallenged by any other chassidim. It was also unchallenged by other Jews, and it was also unchallenged by the government. They completely accepted him. His legacy in this regard was taken up by his close friend, the Chidushei Harim, after Rav Yitzchak of Vurke's passing in 1848, and also by his own descendants in Vurke and Amshinov, and it kind of became a legacy of Ger through the Chidushei Harim in general of being leaders in Jewish politics in Warsaw and in Poland. Rav Yitzchak of Vurke was initially brought to the Chassidic movement by Rav Davidl Biderman of Lelov, the founder of the Lelov Chassidic Dynasty. As were many others of that generation in Poland, Rav Davidl of Lelov was a great recruiter. Rav Yitzchak was a student of Rav Davidl Lelov. He was also a student of the Chayz of Lublin, and of course the Yiddish Kalish of Pshischa, and Rav Simcha Bunim. They all passed away within a few years of each other. So Rav Yitzchak and Rav Moshe of Lelov, Rav Davidl Lelov's son, went all the way to Ukraine, to Ramatul of Chernobyl, the Chernobyl Magid, to accept him as their new teacher, but he refused to take them as students because he insisted that they can be leaders in their own right back in Poland. So they returned to Pshischa and they became followers of Rav Simcha Bunim of Pshischa, and then his son Rav Moshe, like I said, and then finally in 1829 he emerges as the main leader of that faction. He served as rabbis of some towns for a time. He was also employed for a time by Temeril Bergson, the famous wealthy woman from Warsaw who supported many of the Polish tzaddikim, rebbes, and chassidim at the time. The Rav Yitzchak of Vurke was extremely close with the Kotzker. He even visited him following his passing. In other words, after Rav Yitzchak of Vurke had already passed away and the Kotzker was still alive, Rav Yitzchak of Vurke would still visit him. I don't even know what that means. But at one of the weddings of one of the Kotzker's children, he didn't come out to the chuppah. And he said, when he finally came out, he said, I was busy. I had a visitor. Rav Yitzchak of Vurke was here visiting. So whatever that means, take it or leave it. The Kotzker once went to Pshischa on Rav Simcha Bunim's yard site, and he said he met Rav Yitzchak of Vurke there. So he said, I'm not a grave guy. I don't go visit graves. In other words, the Kotzker would not come on one of my trips. But I came to see you. I knew you would be here on the yard site, so I came to see you. So the two were very close. Rav Yitzchak of Vurke had an anger jacket. He would only get angry if he was wearing that jacket. So if he felt the need to get angry, he would wait until he put on that jacket. This way he knew he was really getting angry for the right reason, and it took him a few minutes to calm himself down. Nothing was spontaneous. It was all controlled. Once he asked his gabbai to bring it because he needed to express anger about someone or something. When they brought it to him, he asked his gabbai to wear it instead and get angry for him because he said it's too difficult for him to get angry. He can't do it. He can't bring himself to get angry. He also was involved in lots of chesed projects. He fundraising for the poor. He split his time, like I said, between Vurke and Warsaw because he was always there, within his political leadership position. And in a letter that he wrote, he praised the Warsaw Jewish community. He said that they make a weekly collection of money and food every Friday afternoon for the poor and especially for widows and orphans. And he's encouraging other Jewish communities around central Poland to adopt a similar custom. Very, very, very interesting. Now, when he passes away in 1848, he's succeeded by his dear friend, Rav Shraga of Gritza, who passed away during a cholera epidemic a few months later. Many years later, descendants of Rav of Gritza would form the Aleksander Dynasty, which we discussed recently in an episode devoted to Alexander. Rav Yitzchak of Vurke was ultimately succeeded by his two sons. His older one, Rav Yaakov David Kalish, was a rabbi in Amshinov, so he established the Amshinov Dynasty. And his younger son, One said there's also another friend of his who continued Vurke. Excuse me, before I get on. Rabbi Yaakov Ari Guterman of Radzamin. He kind of had another branch of Vurke, but it was Rabbi Yitzchak's younger son was the one who continued in Vurke. His second son, Rav Menachem Mendel Kalish, and he's a fascinating figure known as the Silent Tzadik. He barely spoke. He spoke without speaking, his chassidim would say. He danced without moving. Any slight move or any cryptic small saying that he said was studied and interpreted. He almost never spoke. He evoked this awe, this seriousness, even a fear. It was much more like Kutsk than Vurke. Whatever cryptic things that he said and people didn't understand had to be interpreted by his close student and eventual successor of Dov Berish Landa of Biala, who was the ancestor of the Strikov Dynasty. Rav Menachem Mendel, the Silent Tzadik, was also close with the Kutzker, and some say that's how Rav Mendel even became a leader of the Vurke Chassidim. He was hoping that they'd all go to his brother in Amshinov, or one of the other new branches of Vurke. He didn't want them to come to him. He didn't want anything for himself. He preferred to stay quiet and hidden, so he escaped to Kutsk. He went into the Kutzker, and they both sat there silently with each other, not exchanging a single word. And when he got up to leave, the Kutzker said, "I couldn't get anything out of him, but he extracted everything from me." The Kutzker allegedly prevailed upon him to accept the leadership of Vurke Chassidim. Very serious. He was demanding truth, style of the old Pshischa and Kutsk, which was kind of very different from his father's warmth. The Vurke Chassidim, during his tenure, were known for their intense unity, almost like a fraternity. They enjoyed each other's company. The followers of Rav Mendel of Vurke, a saying in Polish Hasidus at the time, went that a Vurke Chassid without a bottle of mashke, a bottle of alcohol, is not a Vurke Chassid. So they, even with the intensity, I guess they needed to let off steam with the intensity. This Rav Mendel passed away in 1868. He was succeeded by his close student, Reb Dov Berish Land of Biala. Eventually, that's the Strikov Dynasty. Later, the Aleksander Dynasty emerged from the Danziger family as well, like I mentioned. One son-in-law established the Naderzin Dynasty, another branch of Vurke. Another child was Skernovich. Some chassidim went with his young 17-year-old son, Rav Simcha Bunim, who established a Vurke branch in Otvatsk, outside of Warsaw. Rav Simcha Bunim Kalish of Vurke Otvatsk was another fascinating figure. Very extreme. He had some odd stringencies in halacha. He had separate rooms for meat and dairy, separate clothing for meat and dairy. He would wait 24 hours between meat and dairy. He had separate sections of the house. Some sections of his house were used for Pesach, other sections for Chametz. I guess he's the first person to have a Pesach kitchen. He stayed very often separate from his family. He wouldn't eat outside of his home. If he had to ever travel, he'd bring along his own bread and raisin wine. Once a Rebbe sent him shalach manis wrapped in a newspaper. He sent back the entire shalach manis because he was opposed to newspapers, so he felt it was inappropriate. The mezuzahs in his shtibel in Otvatsk were the size of a Megillah. He was against modern fashion. He would not even receive petitioners who weren't dressed to his taste. And like the custom of Vurke and Amshinov, really comes from Pshischa. He would daven very late in the day. He attempted to move to the Holy Land twice. The first time in 1887, he overstayed his visa and was arrested by the Ottoman authorities and imprisoned, and then deported back to Poland. He went again in 1905 because he was very concerned about the 1905 Russian Revolution, and he moved to Tveria, and he stayed there for 2 years until his passing in 1907. He's buried in Tveria. The interesting thing about Rav Simcha Bunim Kalish of Vurke was his granddaughter. And of course, he's succeeded by his son, the next Rav Mendel Kalish of Vurke, also in Otvatsk, and he had this daughter, who was a granddaughter of Rav Simcha Bunim, named Ita Kalish. It was a very interesting woman. She left religious observance entirely. She was very educated, very active, a big writer, an activist, Zionist, Yiddishist. She had different phases throughout her life. She moved to Palestine in 1930, and she had a very interesting and accomplished life. She lived well into her 90s. But what's most interesting is her detailed memoir. She wrote this very detailed autobiography, which provides much insight into Polish Jewish life. and Polish Chassidic life, and especially of the Vurke family during the early 1900s. So it's a great resource. Between Rav Simcha Bunim's children and the other various branches, there were quite a few Vurke-related branches, mostly in the Warsaw area on the eve of the Holocaust. Most of the Rebbes, their families, and chassidim were killed during the Holocaust. Very few survived. Some surviving chassidim joined one of the similar courts which were reestablished after the war, such as Amshinov or Strikov, or Aleksander. One of the most important of these was, of course, the legendary Amshinov Rebbe, Rav Shimon Shalom Kalish, who also resided in Otvatsk. He escaped to Vilna at the war's outset, and he eventually made it to Shanghai, where he spent the war years in Shanghai in the community of the refugees, where he exhibited tremendous leadership among the refugee community in Shanghai. I think Rav Shimon Shalom Kalish, Amshinov Rebbe, as well as the Amshinov faction of Vurke, deserve their own treatment, so maybe we'll do that one day as well. But suffice it to say that he emerged as a charismatic leader during the war years and the immediate post-war years for Vurke survivors. If I had to summarize about the Vurke legacy today, it would be in two areas. First of all, the dynasties of Amshinov, Strikov, Aleksander, and some other smaller Polish dynasties which are still around, all are with us, and they all come from Vurke. But beyond that, Vurke and its branches and its offshoots were so dominant in Polish Jewish leadership in general. Pioneers in shtadlanis, in Jewish politics and leadership, responsibility for the entire community because of their philosophy of love for all Jews, that legacy continues in the general Jewish community as well to this very day. So this is Yehuda Geber with Jewish History Soundbites. You can reach me at yehuda@yehudageber.com for questions, comments, sources, tours, trips, sponsorships, and lectures. You can subscribe to Jewish History Soundbites on any podcast platform, and I hope you enjoyed.